Seen but never touched. Heard but too reliably. Such words turn bitter.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Solacene, the podcast where we imagine a beautiful, sustainable, tactile future.
You remembered to say it this time, nice.
Yes, welcome to the internet semester. This is the 4th episode in a deep dive into the internet in the ideal world and how it can lead to more sustainable living in our communities and in our environment. Happy Easter! It's Easter today when we're recording. We have some beautiful tulips here on the YouTube that you can see.
Solacene podcast on YouTube.
Yeah. And this week we're going to be talking about place websites. So, for example, the website of a museum or of a cafe. We're going to talk about internet tone versus real life tone when it comes to communicating. And we also have some notes from the field of having no power for 4 days and it just coming back on about an hour ago.
Yeah, this episode is going to be flavored with that experience. And hopefully we don't waylay it too much, but that's definitely been on our minds. I guess we can actually kind of start talking about that because it was the Montreal ice storm. That's the reason why we didn't have the famous Montreal ice storm, why we haven't had power. We were thankful that it did come back immediately before recording because otherwise we would have had to devolve to some dark tactics to try and record this with no power, and I don't think it would have sounded pretty.
No.
But it would have been fine. So you said at the start of this semester, this internet semester, that you had a feeling, a premonition, a foreboding feeling that this would be the most personally transformative semester. 4 weeks in, Alicia, how has that been the case, or hasn't it?
It has. I've noticed my screen time has decreased. I almost instantly developed this hyper-awareness of my internet use on my phone mainly. I'm not one to open up my laptop unless I'm doing taxes, writing something for the zine, doing actual work, so most of my screen time is documented on my phone. And obviously the last 4 days my screen time has been near zero with the few glimpses of I'll get a little bit of charge and check the power map. But also with this power outage, and the week before, it's funny because it was almost like, for everyone I've talked to, it says this whole week felt weird anyway. And this whole week I'd been waking up early, you usually do, and I just stay in bed.
Yep.
Waking up early and using candlelight to go about my morning routine due to that thing about lumens or whatever, that you should kind of ease yourself into the bright, harsh LED world. Okay. And this semester, and just life, has been throwing a lot at me to try and reduce my screen time. And I certainly think it has. I've been reading a lot more.
I think the weather plays a part because we're not shrouded in darkness for most of our waking lives anymore.
Yeah, it's true. We just came out of winter where it would get dark at 4:30, 5:30, get light at 8, and then you were a little bit, once the solar power went down, you had to kind of just rely on, I'm going to watch a movie, I guess, because you don't want to go to bed at 7:30, but you also don't really always have the energy. With
regards to the ice storm and the power outage, I was remarking that it's interesting because it feels like the opposite of the COVID lockdowns, which is the most recent kind of emergency situation that we're familiar with. In that situation, it lasted longer, but it was the case that you were pretty much forced to stay home, but you had access to all the virtual world, and so everybody's screen time shot up, everyone was watching movies, Zooming for casual and professional relationships, all that kind of thing. And in general, we were kind of digital citizens for, I don't know, depending on where you lived, a year or 2 years or something.
Yeah.
Whereas this, you can go anywhere, but that part of the world, I guess, the cyberspace, the non-place, was almost completely shut off to us for 4 days. And I have to say, for us being self-proclaimed solar sites, I don't know if we dealt with it that well.
No, I think I'm going to make a few purchases, which isn't especially Solacene, but I think they're purchases to make us more self-sufficient.
Okay.
Top of my list, I would really like to buy a radio, a power.
Yes, you were saying that about
powered radio. Because we had no way to know what was going on. The power went out in the middle of the storm, so the storm wasn't even over yet.
Yeah.
And even my phone had a bit of charge, but I got called into work. it's like because no one has landlines, and also no one has any way of getting the news outside of their phones.
Yeah.
It was not scary, but it was quite isolating. Of I don't know what's happening.
This is kind of a subtle transition to the first question of the day about place websites, because that was also my big observation that really, I mean, it doesn't have to be a specific www dot, but even the Facebook page of a particular branch of a supermarket or of a school or of a church or of some other like specialty store, without that, because we don't have a Yellow Pages, and as you said, we don't have a landline because nobody ever does, like the only way of knowing if a place is open before you even get there, be it because of weather or because of the holidays, because it's Easter weekend, is to physically go there. And it's like, it felt kind of wild.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wish it felt more normal though. I'll say that.
Yeah, with the places, you had to walk there. At first it was challenging because of the weather, but then fortunately it got nice. But still, like you have to live slower. Like you have to, okay, this is closed, I'm going to keep going.
Yeah.
I had a meeting a couple days ago, so I had to find internet basically. And I spent about 2 hours walking around trying to find a place, and then ended up not finding one. So yeah, it was definitely interesting. I also found this store, it's not related especially to the internet, but just power and sustainability in general. It instantly made you more aware of your resource consumption in that, okay, we knew we had 1 tank left of hot water.
Yeah.
So like you knew that. We had 15 candles, something like that.
Yeah.
And then last night it's like, this is probably the last night these candles are going to burn. And you just like visually have a representation of your resources going down in a way that we don't see. Like there's not a meter on the wall saying,
yeah,
this is how much power you're using and it's running out. Because,
that's a good point. I like that actually.
Infinite.
I mean, a lot of houses do have exactly that meter, right? But it tells you in a rather unintuitive number. It's like, is this in watts, kilowatts, joules? You know, like it's not. And most people don't know those values off the top of their head and understand the units that well. So I do think if there's some kind of visual thing, even just comparing it to prior months or something, that might be kind of an interesting idea for power consumption. Yeah, you're right, it's not really related to the internet. But so this idea of place websites and they're having replaced the Yellow Pages, because that's effectively what they did. It's like before, if you wanted to know, oh, is the butcher open on Good Friday? If so, at what time? You just found them in the Yellow Pages, gave them a phone call, and now you just type it in. So I was trying to think about the pros and cons of this shift. And one of the cons, I think, this might be a bit of a reach, is the idea that it has perhaps contributed to an increase in social anxiety, or at least social anxiety that manifests on taking phone calls. Because I know I have definitely felt that in my life, my somewhat young life, and I can 100% imagine people even younger than me or older. It's like, since everywhere has a website now, if there was some old-fashioned store that you actually did have to call to learn anything, it would be quite daunting. Because people say that, right? There's a anxiety over phone calls. A lot of people feel that.
I was reading a book about different generations, and it was talking about, it's a very millennial thing, so people younger than us apparently don't have this the way that our age.
Well, I guess they do like IG Lives and Snapchat and that kind of thing.
But also, along those lines of like the anxiety, I think these websites cause us to overplan a bit. I mean, I will rarely go somewhere without looking at the menu. Like, obviously I have food issues, but it's also like, I like to be very prepared of even, will they have a bathroom, will they have internet? It's really changed travel and like exploration quite a bit. Travel abroad, I'd say almost exclusively for the better. It was really hard to plan trips abroad before the internet. But travel within an exploration within your own city or your own town, it's like, you're never going to be walking down the street, not never, but you're less likely to and say, oh, what's this place? And just kind of like go in. I feel like you're like, well, I'm going to this place that I saw good reviews for. I also think we are less likely to even take recommendations, because it used to be, oh, I want to go to a nice cinema. Do you have any recommendations? And then you would take someone's recommendation, but now you can just look and see everyone else's reviews online.
That's true. And even if someone personally gives you a recommendation for a restaurant on a street, my instinct still would be to go home and look it up and find the website. So that is interesting.
Yeah, I also found a con for this is that places don't need distinct looks. I kind of thought of this morning as places have become very homogenous on the outside, but it used to be like, okay, there's the marquee because you need to know what's playing inside of this theater.
Oh yeah.
This is obviously a church because it has all these steeples or whatever, but now a church can be in any building because you'll still be able to find it. And what was another idea? Oh yeah, even the barbershop spirals, like those little spinny ones, like a barbershop can be anywhere. They don't really need to distinguish themselves or even have a sign.
So in other words, there's things that give character to a town.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I also wanted to talk about next week, because this is a big conversation about choice paralysis and how the internet feeds into that, and also just an overwhelm of information. That's one of the major symptoms of internet addiction and internet usage disorders, is like the overload of information. But I find often we end up, okay, let's go out to eat tonight. You look and look and look, it's not really, then you just end up eating in anyway.
Yeah.
Or you end up just watching a movie at your house because there's too many choices when you're going out, and there's too many things to consider. Whereas before the internet, it was perhaps just like, we'll go. If it's bad, we'll find it out there. We don't have to read 100 reviews before we go. And then also along these lines, of course, it causes dependence on the internet, and therefore when the internet's down, you have no hope of finding it. I think...
The place websites, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it probably makes people worse at navigation, worse at just kind of understanding things. Like me, I cannot discern any trend with regards which stores are open and when, like even on Sundays or on holidays especially. But I can imagine older generations have more of an intuition for it. You know what I mean? Because restaurants, those are always open. Grocery stores, those are some, you know, like I feel like some people, they have more of a lay of the land like that. Whereas I would have to check almost every time, or it would just be like a coin toss for me.
Yeah, I think the easy solacing, in air quotes, solution to this would be having more local newspapers, and just being, perhaps you don't have to have it delivered to your door, but maybe one posted on every block, or just something.
I like the radio idea.
Yeah, radio works too.
It's analog. No one, like, you'd be much less inclined to listen to it for hours like you would for scrolling. You just kind of tune in, wait for what you want to hear, and then tune out. So that'd be neat. So I agree with your pros and cons in that. It's, on the one hand, it's more informative and easier, obviously, than calling, quicker. On the other hand, of course, it does reduce a lot of that mystery, which is the texture of life, and just the vibe of discovery. Like, I remember even when we went on our trip to Europe last year, there were a couple things, but like really only a couple things that we knew we wanted to do along the way. The rest of it was all just let's see. And so one of my favorite experiences was when we were walking around Paris and we just saw a sign for Gustave Moreau Museum. And I was like, I recognize the artist, I've seen his pictures on the internet, they're some of my favorites. And then we just kind of wandered in, not ever checking the place website, and even just wandered inside, and we're like, oh, it's free.
Yeah.
So we just, that was
free.
one of my favorite places.
His house.
Yeah.
Like, it was so cool.
His home, and it has not just some of the art, but almost all of it.
Yeah.
So
just so crazy.
But the thing is, had we planned that ahead of time and found the Gustave Moreau Museum, and we would have had that, oh, it's free discovery, but only in our living room in Montreal, and we're like, oh, that's cool, it's free, we could go there. But it's not the same as when you get there and you're so excited.
Yeah, I think these spontaneous feelings also build rapport with the employees. Like, you walk into a shop and you're like, oh, this is cute, and they're like, yeah, like, we are really proud of it, or whatever it may be. They're small interactions, but they're human, and like make the experience a bit more real. I had a couple more pros and cons. One pro is obviously the convenience of it. Like, I don't think anything could ever beat this.
No. Well, I hope not.
Yeah, and the con is that they're almost always out of date, it feels.
Well, yeah.
Which is kind of unfortunate. But because you can always call or whatever, I feel like there's less of a inclination to keep it up to date, whereas if they had to submit their hours to the newspaper for that week, they'd be correct.
It's also it's more, another pro, it's more power to the consumer, because like, let's say you're looking for things to do for a day out with your children, and you have like your laptop and you have different tabs open, one's for the zoo, one's for the cinema, one's for the, I don't know, museum. And you can see the opening times, you can see the entrance fees for different age groups, you can see it all and compare it so much easier.
Yeah.
Rather than having to make a phone call for each one, writing down. So I feel like it allows us to make better decisions.
More informed
like
decisions,
that.
certainly. Especially if you're trying to find like a dentist. When we moved here, I needed a dentist, and it was
point.
like I would have just wandered into the one closest, but maybe would have been charged $1,000 more than somewhere else.
Yeah.
The final thing was it does discourage smaller businesses from prospering. Perhaps there's a business that's been here forever, but they don't have a social media presence or an online presence because they choose not to, or they just don't know how. And then it obviously optimizes the profits of the companies that have the best search engine optimization, which is certainly a challenge for anyone who has a business, small, large, digital, in person. It's a challenge to
It's kind of gross. I don't think I'm alone in that. This is most of what I use Facebook for.
Yeah.
Because most small things that you're talking about, a barber shop, a butcher, they won't have a phone website, they'll have a Facebook page. So I feel like that's the only thing of value that website has really brought to us. But I think in total, in the solo scene, my conclusion was these exist, but people are better able to temper their curiosity, let's put it like that.
Yeah.
So that you don't learn everything about, like, if you go to a zoo, I'm sure many of them just list everything they have. But if you just went there, then you'd be surprised by the oldest turtle in the province.
Yeah, exactly.
But what do you think about that, like the phone call curiosity? But do you relate to that with like the phone call anxiety? Because I remember from a young age, even for some reason it was my job since I was like age 11. I might be misremembering, but that's what it felt like. On the off chance that my family would be ordering a pizza, they'd always give me the phone. I think it's because I was the one most into pizza. And I would have to like steel myself and try and hype myself up for about 10 to 15 minutes beforehand, because I would always get so nervous. And now I know that a lot of pizza places, in response to this, have the text, right? You can just text in your order, because obviously there's that many people who would so much rather do that. I think it's so interesting.
It is interesting. I definitely went through a phase of having this anxiety. I've come to enjoy phone calls though, for the most part. And it's just like these people get tens, hundreds of phone calls a day. They're not going to remember you.
Yeah.
I feel like COVID definitely changed my air quotes social anxiety, like shifted it around a bit, because I used to be pretty confident, I'd say 95% of the time in person, but now I will do anything on Zoom, anything on phone. But even just today, there's like an hour where I had to mingle with people while you were doing something else, and I was sweating, and I was like, this is not normal for me, because I used to be super comfortable with people, but it's so rare, these opportunities where you're just in a room with a bunch of strangers and have nothing to do besides talk.
Yeah.
Because I'll actively, like, I won't go on my phone, even if it means I'm just standing, like, literally in the middle of the room sweating.
Everyone listen to Solo Scene.
For 20 minutes.
Just plugging it.
Yeah. And then someone will come over and be like, you good?
And you'll say, hey.
Yeah.
You forget how to socialize.
Exactly.
Speaking of forgetting how to socialize, the meme of the week this week is...
The meme of the week this week is, I'll describe it. It is text that says me typing LOL, LMAO, LMFAO with a bunch of emojis,
That's
and
the
then
closest we've come to... Sorry, just read it.
so the meme is, it's text up top and it says LOL, LMAO, a bunch of emojis and laughing, ha 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 ha, bunch of exclamation points, and there's a picture underneath that is someone looking very serious, or even just someone that has like air coming out of their nose. Because often on the internet, when we react to something, it's quite over the top, but our countenance in the human world does not change, or you just go like this. Yeah.
That's probably how people react to listening to our podcast.
Exactly.
When we're on air, like, falling out of our chairs with laughter about something that one of us says, and then the people listening, like, go...
So that's the meme. It's hard to nail down the exact one, but I feel like everyone has seen it, or at least experienced it, which can be a meme. And the points I wanted to talk about on this is, we're going to talk now about tone on the internet versus in real life, And this meme really captures how much we exaggerate on the internet, how inauthentic perhaps we tend to be, and how the internet is this constant rolling over of more and more intense or severe behavior to get a reaction. Because LOL used to be enough to convey that was funny, but now LOL is almost like LOL.
It's almost
sarcastic.
You almost have to put it now. It's just a part of punctuation. It's funny.
Yeah, I put haha in almost every message. But I do in real life say that quite a bit. Like I laugh a lot.
Because I think now the actual LOL would be the crying laughing emojis. And no, it's not just like chuckling emoji.
It's not just a
You're
smile.
Crying laughing. That's how funny it is. That's it. Yeah, that was one of the points I had about this question about real life tone versus internet tone, is the almost like race towards more extreme language. And you've talked about it there in terms of joking around and comedy, but also there's the obvious examples. If there's like arguments or hostility or politics, it's not enough to say, yeah, I kind of think this. You have to be really for this. Or like people talk about it with reactions to films, right? Like reviews. You can't really be lukewarm on something. It has to be, I love this or I hate this. So because that's what gets traction, and that's ultimately the currency of clout, is what the internet thrives on.
Yeah, the Marvel movies are a perfect ecosystem to watch, because the first Captain America was epic. Everyone loved it. It was like, wow, what an epic movie. And then compared to Endgame, it's basically child's play in terms of what's on screen, the scale,
what are you talking about? What do you mean?
Like 15 years ago on the internet, you type LOL, it means I'm laughing, that was funny.
Yeah.
But now you type LOL and it's just punctuation. With the Marvel movies, it's like, the first, the original ones that came out.
Yes.
Everyone loved them. They were like going to the theaters for them, talking about them. But now if that came out, it was like alongside Endgame, for an example, I'd be like, what? There's only one superhero in this movie?
Yes.
Like, it's just so lame.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's exactly the same thing, but it's an interesting parallel. Like, you kind of have to keep chasing the high.
Exactly. I don't know.
Another example I had of this is like dramatizing, so this is a bit of a specific use, but something that always annoys me on the internet is like in tweets or in posts when people, usually it'll be political, so like let's say it's a young person complaining about the economic situation they've been born into, or like climate change is an example. They'll make a really long list, but often in that list it will include like 3 or 4 things that are just, they're either non-factors or they're kind of repeating or they're just irrelevant. But because it makes the list visually look a lot bigger, it makes them sound more like experts on the topic, and it makes their post have more credibility. Does that make any sense? Which wouldn't really fly if you were talking in real life. Like, I don't think you could just pad out for 1 minute with mostly fluff and have people take it kind of seriously. But just the way that we see things versus the way that we hear things, which we'll be talking about later also, I see this quite a lot along the lines of dramatizing our speech.
Yeah, I find the internet is also over-research, is how I'll put it. In real life, like if I just said, I think, like with the power, I get a feeling it'll come on in a day or two. You'd be
Source?
Like, but in real life, you're like, cool, you have a feeling, or you just would assume that I read it somewhere or whatever. But online, it's like, well, where did you learn this? Can you give me some facts about where this came from? And it's like, I mean, I know it's good to an extent so there's not circulation of false information and so on.
Right.
But because there's so much information on the internet, I mean, every day the amount of content put out is equal to all the content that existed in the world, ever written, ever whatever, before 2006, I think. Like, all of human history.
So much content.
Yeah. But
is anybody content?
That's the question there. It's easy enough for false information to circulate, like 60% or so of published articles that are peer-reviewed have falsified information. Yeah. But it's hard to get it off the internet because the internet's forever.
Another thought I had was, you mentioned it with the kind of the mask that people put on when they say they're laughing even though they're not laughing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just in general the falsity with which people type and present themselves on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that's so different to how people are in real life.
Yeah.
Like they'll be so much more kind of grandiose or theatrical or evil or competitive or humorous or whatever it may be. Like it's just like that's not you. That's just your avatar, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So like the way I wrote it was it's kind of like the difference between a poetic or literary voice and one's real voice. Because for instance, when I write poems and when I write stories, I know I don't write the same way that I talk because like I just don't, and a lot of people don't. Or people singing voice, right? Like that sounds different than their talking voice. It's just what it is, which is fine because that's a minority of my expression, and singing is the minority of the singer's expression. But it's maybe a bit of a weird thing when people post more than they actually talk. You know what I mean? Because then it's like which is the real identity and which is the false one, if that makes any sense. And another meme that I had, maybe stepping on the meme of the week toes, is the one that's like Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram.
Yeah.
Different pictures of ourselves. And it's the different ways that we present ourselves. One, according to who's seeing it. Because I think that's what the meme is, you know, like ostensibly about. Facebook is for family, Instagram's for thirsty acquaintances or whatever, LinkedIn is for co-workers, you know, this kind of thing. But it also depends who you are speaking as, which is something that's kind of interesting because some things you use a screen name, some things you use your real name. So there's a big difference there in the anonymity as well.
Yeah, because in real life, yeah, of course you have different personas. I speak to you differently than I speak to my parents or to kids.
But here's what I'm saying. I feel like that code switching, because that's the term for it, is exaggerated.
Yeah,
and it's like in real life, the aim actually to be like an integrated, you know, well-rounded, well-developed person is to present yourself as similarly as you can in the different social circles. Whereas the internet, I think, promotes the opposite.
I think it does. Yeah. I find the internet also, I was trying to find the study or studies that this came out of. It's common knowledge, but I've heard it talked about in an academic setting, so I wanted to find the article, but I couldn't. But I'll explain it now. Of the more people that join a conversation, the dumber it gets, basically. And dumber is like a harsh word for it, but say you're speaking with one other person, you could have just met them or you know them really well, but you're going to be speaking more personally and perhaps deeper on a topic. But then for every person that comes in, I wish I had the number, but it's a percent that the quality of the conversation goes down.
I think that makes sense.
Because you have to then, or you don't have to, but you feel compelled to then make it more and more dumbing down.
I think everyone knows this intuitively, because even there's the case of like hearing. There'll be three people who are having their own conversation. I'm like, oh, what did you say? And you have to repeat things, and just it becomes simpler just to talk about the weather or where we're going for dinner. Yeah,
so I was with that. That's like, okay, up to 10 people, and then we're all just going to be talking about the weather. But the internet is everybody.
Yeah.
So think about the quality of conversation you're having on there is going to be basically child's conversation. It's going to be very... Yeah.
Sorry. Depending on the website, though. Because there's kind of a running meme, for instance, on Reddit that once a subreddit hits a certain point, it becomes worthless. Because it might be previously a hobbyist or niche one, like let's say it's about fixing up motocross bikes. I can imagine that the conversations they're having about those bikes are quite in-depth until everybody gets into it and it becomes a million people, then it just starts becoming silly memes, essentially.
Exactly.
So I do think there are some smaller areas of the internet that are for that. But wider social media, you're right, is perhaps not the best place.
I also had a bit of a contradictory point on tone in real life versus online, but I guess it's not necessarily contradictory. I feel like online, it's either 100% positive or just the cruelest, meanest places ever. So like a YouTube comment will always be
one or the other.
Full of, either we love you, this is so wonderful, or just dreadful comments. And I was reading this thing that I found interesting because you see on Instagram, it's like, oh, you can hide the likes now. Or on YouTube, we're getting rid of the dislike button, or Facebook is the same. And you'd think, oh, this is to promote mental health so that people aren't being bullied with these negative feedbacks. But in reality, it's like, who would want to, like, why would having negative feedback options improve the user's experience from the perspective of these companies? Therefore, it's in their benefit to keep you on there longer, get rid of any opportunity for negative experiences. So they want it to be as positive an experience as possible, not for the user's mental health or sanity, but so that you're stuck on there longer, basically.
Sure.
I also think next week we can talk a bit about comments versus other types of interactions a bit.
Yeah.
And how those
DMs,
differ. Because it's often, people don't comment, like they probably comment 5% of the time, but liking is this very low energy interaction that is, it basically is, it has no expulsion, but it's tricking our brain. It has a lot of impact on us.
I think that's I'll save it for next week, but I think that's the thing in the dating apps, that a lot of people will swipe positively, I'm not sure which direction that is, but never follow up, right? Because it's like, well, that's an easy thing to do. Along the lines also of tone, I was thinking this is kind of a niche observation, but because of context, like let's say I'm a part of, say, leftist Twitter, and so that means the people I'm following and the people who follow me and the general algorithm that I am in are all of a similar mind. You can often presume a shared knowledge about things that you couldn't do in real life. So like there's this viral meme tweet that was like, it said something like, so once all the boomers go, do you guys want to switch to metric or something? And it was just like, you're saying this thing into the void to people who you know will agree with you, but there's almost no room that you could just go in and shout that and have people laughing in the real world. I mean, so that's interesting. Another thing about tone, obviously there's anonymity, and it's the case that because of this, people are much quicker to hostility and that kind of thing. But on a bit of a lighter note, I also feel like things just get a lot more playground, like things get a lot more childish and infantile in a weird way. So it doesn't even have to be political. Sometimes if I'm reading about football on the internet, for instance, soccer, it's just like some of the nicknames that people type very, very frequently. So it's not so rare that it's probably children doing it, is what I'm saying. There's a lot of adults who type things that I don't think they would ever say in real life. Like one of the jokes I say to you is like, Penaldo, which is basically just a derogatory nickname towards Cristiano Ronaldo, saying, oh, he only scores penalties. But it's like in real life at the bar, grown men are talking about Penaldo.
Yeah.
But because it's written, you can type these very, very childish, Trumpian almost, silly playground insults, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, certainly.
And finally, just continuing last week when I mentioned that the internet in some regards is not just the town hall, but like the bathroom stall. It was this idea that I think the bathroom stall, the things people write on there are things that everybody knows, that, like everyone knows human nature, so people know that these things are in our heads, in our thoughts all the time. And they're written on bathroom stalls because there is no place for them really in polite society. But the internet is almost like, what if, and the way that I think also the internet tone is affecting and influencing real life tone is that polite society is becoming less and less the norm, and bathroom stalls are becoming much more common. So like for instance, I was thinking about swearing. Feels like a lot more people swear now, like that's a lot more of a casual thing. And I think the internet, I mean, this goes also with like the dissolution of religion, like people believe in less things and all these kind of peripheral changes in society. But I think at the very least the internet has accelerated this.
Yeah, I think so, because it's easier to type and then you're not saying it.
Yeah.
Because even, I mean, maybe I'm just a new adult. When you're a kid, like if you said a bad word or heard someone say it, like it was an almost physical reaction to it of like, whoa, that just like happened. But if you just see it, because you read it in a book or you read it typed out, and it's like, well,
that's just the norm now. Like I think if you look on like television, I just think that a lot more people are swearing than used to. I think it's very interesting how these things have become normalized. And going into the last question of the day, which was about seen versus heard communication. So the psychological and maybe even sociological effects of reading most of our communication rather than hearing it in real time or in real life. I don't have much to talk about this, but I think I'll just reread the haiku with which I started the episode because that is on this topic. So I said, seen but never touched, heard but too reliably, such words turn bitter. And line by line, it's like the seen but never touched is this, again, just talking about the non-place. It's like we see the words, but our only interaction with them is kind of a glossy swipe with a fingertip, or even if it's on a laptop, you never touch it. Whereas I think a written word, there's something about the fact that you are physically turning the page, or even if it's written with a pencil, you can actually feel where the pencil has changed form. And heard but too reliably is the idea that so much of our speech has this innate value because it is so transient. Because it is so transient, and you have to pay attention in the moment to follow and to understand. And in general, it's just the idea that maybe a lot of value or perceived value has been lost because of the endless archiving of everything. What do you think?
I have a lot of thoughts about this one. The archiving is a big obstacle that I find these days, in that it's such a hard mindset to get out of I can just look back on this, of memorizing. Essentially, in university, I never took any initiative to memorize a single thing, because I always thought these are recorded lectures, I have the textbooks, I have my notes, I will never need to memorize it. But trying to get out of that is really challenging, but I think it's almost crucial to healthy brains. I mean, memorization prevents dementia, and it also just, this is one thing that this power outage really made me rethink, in that, well, okay, I'm going to try and be as concise as possible. There's this impulse to post on social media and to take pictures. I've sat in audiences recently and seen people almost like it seems like an addiction, like an impulse, but there's almost a stronger word than that.
Compulsion? Compulsion
to take a picture of something. And it's like, you can almost see them like, why am I doing, like, not even thinking about it, just doing it. And I think this is our brains like externalizing our memories and almost externalizing our experiences. And how this relates to the power outage is that I realized I like compulsively will take a screenshot of something if I want to remember it, even if it's a post on Instagram of an outfit I like, of a store I want to visit, whatever. And I screenshot it, never think of it again, but then like know that they're in my screenshots, so I can always like refer back to them if it does get prompted or whatever. And then having no power, I'm like, I don't know anything. Like everything that I want to know, every knitting pattern that I could have done with no power is like screenshotted on my phone. It's not physical, and it's just kind of not dangerous, but it's like, I think taking that one action of printing it off, I'm gonna try and start like writing recipes down in a book. Stuff like this, I think because you're still externalizing it. This is what Socrates talked about, like, as we started was it Socrates? Who was, as we started writing stuff down, he was like, this is not good for humanity. And the phones take it so much farther. How is this relating to?
So this is specific to the possibility of the internet, not just the internet itself.
I want to talk a bit more about this next week, but...
I've also thought about this because I recently have tried or begun going about my day, like if I usually go out, let's say to work, and stay there for several hours without taking my phone. And it's all fine because I don't mind missing music or podcasts or communication with other people or browsing. Like that's not it. What I like to have on me is the Notes app, because when I find something that I'm interested in, that's my easy way of dog-earing it, so I can remember it, so that when I get back to a library, a book, or just having access to the internet, I know what I wanted to look into. And so I just think an easy alternative is to have a small notebook on you all the time, because even then that writing will make you remember it also.
That's what the connection was, of the physical writing does in fact make it more likely to then act on and not just be a waste of your time.
Yeah,
Like,
but the university example is really cool as well, because this is kind of similar to towards the end of our undergrad, I felt a lot less necessity to attend lectures because I was like, well, the slides will be online.
Yeah.
But coincidentally, those are the lectures that I remember the least about, because the slides are online, sure, but being there, hearing it, and what I said about heard but too reliably. So like some professors even uploaded audio of themselves to the internet. So it's like, you know, just looking at it on the surface, it's the exact same as just, well, you could attend or just listen to this later.
Yeah.
And you can actually re-listen to this and go back and pause it so that maybe that's better. I think in a sense it's actually worse because you pay less attention to it.
Yeah.
Like even this podcast, I was thinking the people listening, they can go back 15 seconds if they want, they can go forward 30 seconds if they don't want. And it's wildly different to you and I experiencing it right now.
Yeah.
Because I have to remember the things that you're saying, you have to remember the things I'm saying. So we have to pay more attention than the people listening to us.
Exactly. It's really impacted active listening in like the Zoom meetings. You don't have to be taking cues of the body language, all these things, and therefore, and it's really easy to just say, oh, I missed that, even if you didn't. Like, it's just, Zoom is a really sketchy.
Because it makes you more of an observer, right? Like you're less active in it in a sense.
Yeah, I also was thinking about the seen versus heard communication. First, I'm just going to say this fact, but I learned that 90% of our body's intake of stimuli is visual. So it's 90% visual, then 10% shared across all the other senses. And so that's why TikTok and graphics and things are so much more appealing to us, but we process these 60,000 times faster than text. So it's like we obviously can't remember 60,000 times more than we read, but we are still happy to take it in because it's processing quickly. But I think it's just so inefficient in that, like, because the quantity is so much, but with text when you're reading something it's higher quality. And
that's why body language is so key as well, right?
Yeah.
Which the internet largely absolves us from. Even if you see in the profile picture on Twitter, like, oh, that's what that person looks like, you don't know how they look if they were saying that to you. Because I think we're usually quite good judges of if someone's lying, if someone's excited about something, if someone's scared. But on the internet it's all either performative or text.
Yeah, another thing I had about, it's not necessarily seen versus heard, but it's synchronous versus asynchronous meetings, is that I had this meeting yesterday and I was sitting on the side of the road, this is the same meeting I was talking about earlier, on my phone, power lines being fixed immediately beside me, my parents sitting across from me having a conversation.
Shout out.
Yeah, my parents are visiting, shout out to them, they didn't lose power. But like for me, if we're in a meeting, 5 of us in a room, there's a siren outside, we all pause. But when it's remote, there's gonna be like different things happening, like different interruptions. So it's so much more inefficient, and there's no like kind of cues for it. The prime example is people starting to talk at the same time all the time on Zoom. But in real life, there's kind of you take a breath, and then it's like, oh, they're gonna speak, or you kind of can even like raise your hand. Like there's different ways you can kind of indicate you're speaking, and it's just like really choppy and robotic now, and it's super translated into real life. I mean, embarrassingly so to an extent. I'm really hoping that I find ways to combat
I'm sure
that.
you will. You can learn from me.
Yeah.
But I was also thinking that, continuing along that kind of what's the self-deprecating? That self-deprecating tone is the idea that perhaps being raised on text and on the internet more so than real life communication makes people more monotonous, makes people worse communicators in real life. I'm thinking about myself because I feel like I speak in quite a robotic way without much emotion and without much movement. And I feel like that has contributed. Yeah. And I think, I just feel like people are worse speakers than before. And I think this is largely the reason. Yeah,
this is, perhaps by the end of the semester we could compile some sort of resource guide for people to become less internet relying, like obviously that's what this whole semester is, but maybe make it really concise, and that could be our last episode. This is just an idea.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Of literal like books, how to be. I mean, obviously any book you read about how to be a better speaker is gonna have everybody speaking like Obama. But I mean,
what's wrong with that?
Nothing's wrong with that, I guess. But I think it would just be interesting, even for myself, because it's really making me think this semester. I'm gonna keep saying it, but it's inspiring me to change a lot. I feel like the other semesters were all things that like I knew maybe or had already had a slight practice in, but these are really shaking it up, especially coming out of the pandemic. It's a lot of changes.
If you listeners want to shake things up, especially coming out of the pandemic, you can buy one of our So Seen Scenes, linked in the description. There's one for degrowth, one for education, one for nature, and the internet one will for sure be available next week. We'll release a small episode to accompany that launch.
Yeah.
So thank you all for listening. Happy Easter. Have a nice
day.
He redeems himself on the closing clap.
Yes.
You won't let me speak though, were you?
What?